BibleWorm, BibleWorm, reading the Bible with BibleWorm.
Welcome to BibleWorm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, professor of religious studies at Hendrix College and the founding pastor of Mercy Community Church in Little Rock.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish, one Christian.
This week we're kicking off Season 4 of BibleWorm with Genesis 6 through 9, a text that is part children's story, part post-apocalyptic nightmare, the story of the Great Flood and Noah's Ark. We talk about God's regret at having made humankind and the challenge of knowing when things have failed and it's time to start over. We imagine what it must have been like for Noah and those with him to endure many months of uncertainty, and then the difficulty of knowing when the danger was finally over. And we discuss God's movement from violent destruction to covenantal commitment. And we wonder whether we, too, can learn to respond to disappointment with deeper relationship rather than with violence. Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, welcome to Season 4 of BibleWorm.
Season 4!
I know, right? It's crazy.
We're so old.
We
get older every year.
We are.
We're
we
even
do.
older this year than last year.
Yeah, that is true. We're like, I don't know. It feels like I'm at least a year older than I was this time last year. The witty banter. I'm already like, oh yeah, I regret the witty banter. It's like we're in minute 1 of season 4.
We're in minute 1 of episode 1.
So catch me up on the things. How was the summer?
The summer was good. My son's almost 16, and he and I went to Israel for a week and a half. Excellent. Which was amazing and crazy. And we studied, I studied so much about the creation texts, Bobby, which we are not starting with today. I was like, I have so much Torah in my head. But no, that's not what we're doing. That's fine. That was the highlight. That was the highlight of my summer. Then we came home and got COVID. That was probably the low light. But we are okay.
Well, I'm glad. Yeah.
Yes, we are okay. Okay, I have one question that has been burning a hole in my mind.
Oh, yeah?
I've saved it up for you this whole time through my studies in Israel, through my illness and my recovery.
Oh, my goodness.
There was a story you told last spring about a little bird. It wasn't spring, it was summer.
Yeah,
it was like the summer series
yeah.
because we were talking about... I don't remember what exactly we were talking about. But there was a little bird who had made a nest in a part of your house you were supposed to paint.
Yeah.
And you were unsure how to respond to this situation.
It was an ethical quandary that I had. Yeah, so the bird had built a nest in the eaves of my house, and we were getting ready to get our house painted, and so I was concerned. Like, he was actually building the nest, I think, when we talked, and I was afraid, or she, that they were going to have babies, and then we were going to destroy their babies with our house painting. But here's the bad news / good news is my spouse and I are very indecisive. And painting your house is like a big deal, right? Have you ever painted your house?
It's a big
so stressful
deal.
It's so much money, and then you're like, this is going to be our house for the next 10 years, and then all of these things.
I painted my house a bad color maybe 8 years ago, I just look at it every day and hate it.
Yeah. So we choked right at the last minute. We were supposed to get our house painted, right? I think it was maybe at the beginning of June, and we choked, and we just called the painters, and we were like, we can't do it right now because we can't make a decision. And so we put it off for 6 weeks, not because of the bird.
So the birdie has flourished.
Yeah, so by the time we got around to painting our house in like July, I think it was, the birds had like grown up and flown and like gone to college and like
I was gonna say
had baby birds of their own. Like, I don't know the bird life cycle very well, but yeah. So the birds survived very well, even
due to your indecisiveness. Fantastic.
Yeah. Well, Amy, speaking of the destruction of creatures, we're starting out this narrative lectionary cycle with the story of the flood. which is such an interesting choice. Like the last 3 years, we've started with one or the other of the Genesis 1, 2 creation stories.
Yeah. And I was so ready for that, Bobby.
Me too.
I was ready.
Me too. Yeah. So, but instead, and this is the first year, even though this is season 4 of BibleWorm, we started in the second year of the narrative lectionary. So this is actually the first year in the new narrative lectionary cycle. And it starts with the flood story, which is such a fascinating choice to me that this is where you would begin. But this is where they begin. And so thusly, also where we begin.
Yes, indeed.
So today we're in kind of a smattering of texts across the early chapters of Genesis. We're in 6:5 to 22, and then 8:6 to, the narrative lectionary is 12, but I decided to go to 14 or else the dove never gets to land anywhere, and that just made me kind of sad. And then 9:8 to 17. So we're going to do all of those things today. But for the purposes of narrative lectionary, like interpretation, making sense of the text for today, are there things that we should talk about before we get into this text directly?
I think that what feels most pressing to me in terms of context is for listeners to know that there are many cultures that tell a story of a great flood. That could be interpreted in lots of ways. Just that fact alone, you could say well, maybe there was a great flood. That's why so many stories talk about it. You could say that they knew each other or that they didn't know each other. And it's just they live, surrounded by water that is this source of life, but also of terror.
Yeah.
Chaos, flooding is a real danger. And maybe somewhat relatedly, I don't think we're going to go too deeply into this, but our listeners may already be familiar with the theory that there are several different hands in the writing of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible. And this is one of the stories where if you're teaching an introduction to this theory, to source theory, this is a text that you might specifically highlight, showcase, because if you wanted to, you really could pull apart 2 complete versions of this story. And there are points where you could ask, wait, how many animals are brought on the ark? And there are 2 answers to the question, how many days did this go on for? How did, and you'll see maybe that Noah is introduced twice and it tells us twice that there was, the world was corrupt. And to me, in terms of sort of our purposes today, that again just goes back to this idea that this is a story in the human consciousness or the human experience or something that really wanted to be told. And a lot of people told it. A lot of people told it within this community of biblical folk. And in other cultures as well.
I really love that, Amy. That's so helpful. And, this is the text that I use in my classes to teach source theory. I start with the creation stories in Genesis 1 and 2, and we talk about those. But this one's so interesting, as you know, because the two layers that people pull apart are actually interwoven. It's not one story and then another story, because you can't have, there's a flood and then it was fine and there was another flood. So if you're going to have 2 stories, you got to weave them together. And so we do that in my classes. And it really is very interesting. Okay, so in terms of the biblical story and where we are, we don't need to talk much about it, but we've had creation, and then the first humans, Adam and Eve, in the Genesis 2-3 story, have been expelled from the garden. We're in about the 10th generation or something like that of human beings right here, I think. And I don't know. Things have not gone great, I suppose, is how you would say that. And so when we pick up, here in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, God's got some regrets about the whole project of creation, it seems.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start out with 6:5 to 12, and I'm reading in the Common English Bible.
All right.
The Lord saw that humanity had become thoroughly evil on the earth, and that every idea their minds thought up was always completely evil. The Lord regretted making human beings on the earth, and he was heartbroken. So the Lord said, I will wipe off of the land the human race that I've created, from human beings to livestock to the crawling things to the birds in the skies, because I regret that I ever made them. But as for Noah, the Lord approved of him. These are Noah's descendants. In his generation, Noah was a moral and exemplary man. He walked with God. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. In God's sight, the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. God saw that the earth was corrupt because all creatures behaved corruptly on the earth. So I'm just curious. In the beginning of this story, the first way it's said is the Lord saw that humanity had become thoroughly evil. In the CEB, every idea in their minds, but I think it's every inclination of their hearts or something like that is the Hebrew, was always completely evil. Can you just talk a little bit about that sort of assessment? Like God looks at the earth and that's what God sees amongst people. Can you talk a little bit about, how do you start thinking about that?
The first thing that it makes me think of is how over the course of the first creation account, when each part of creation comes to be, God looks at it and says, it's good.
Yeah.
That was good.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, we see over the course of the next few chapters that humans don't behave the way that God wanted them from, something like what happened in the garden, which I think our traditions differ on just how bad of a thing that was.
Yeah.
But Cain and Abel was pretty bad.
Yeah. My tradition, I come out of a Calvinist Presbyterianism, and Calvin's language that he uses is to talk about the total depravity of humankind. Now, he doesn't think that humankind's by our nature are totally depraved. He thinks it's the force of sin in the world, or, we can get into a whole theological conversation about that. But a lot of times when, people find out I'm Presbyterian, they want to talk about total depravity. And they say like, that's such a negative view of what humankind is like. And part of me is like, you are exactly right. That is really negative, and I want to think better things about humanity than that. But then sometimes I look around at the world and I think that is exactly right. I don't want to say people are terrible. I want to say people are capable of terrible things. And that oftentimes, in my just casual experience of the world, seems to outweigh the good things that we're capable of. Maybe that's like the media that I consume or the company that I keep, or I don't know what it is, but I just sometimes, and especially these days, I feel the weight of that. Yeah. And so when the text says, where God says, or the Lord saw that they were thoroughly evil and everything they thought was always evil, I'm like, I kind of get that. I can kind of see that. What do you think about that? Is this overly pessimistic, or do you see truth there, or somewhere in between?
I see the translation in that NJPS is every plan devised by his mind was nothing but evil all the time.
Yeah.
I think that I continue to be probably somewhat naively shocked that there are any people for whom I might make this kind of assessment, although, again, based on the media I consume, I have come to the unfortunate conclusion that there are people that I think this would describe. But I don't think that this is not my view of humanity. Yeah. I think we are a mess for sure. I think some people, it is their planning to be a mess. I think some people, I think we mess up all the time, but I think that's different than plotting for evil.
The language here is Yetzer Machshvot, the inclination of their thoughts. And it made me think of the evil inclination in Judaism. Is that a connection that's reasonable to make?
I think so.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's this Jewish teaching that everyone has what's called a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer HaTov, an inclination towards evil and an inclination towards good. But the Jewish teaching is not that we should rid ourselves of the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara are things like ego or appetite or, like sexual desire. And they're things that can get out of control. Like if you let it take over, it will drive you to evil.
Yeah.
But if you can harness it for good purposes, it can have this is where progress comes from. Like, this is how humans procreate. This is how work gets done. This is how we continue to do things that are hard. There's ego in it for most people. Like that is a driver. And so the idea is that there's power in the Yetzer Hara that we are meant to harness, but it needs to be kept in check. And I actually feel like a lot of the teachings in the Torah are about what are some boundaries we can put around those various human appetites that we have.
Yeah.
So it's interesting if we think about this as like all of the appetites that most humans have just gone totally amok, like totally unchecked. What would that look like in the world? And that's a really interesting way to think about it. That is like, that takes seriously the evil of it, but also makes me able to feel a little more connection to this text, as opposed to saying like, they were only evil all the time. Like, that's a pretty strong. That's a strong statement. That's a strong statement. But I have a Yetzer Hara.
Yeah.
I think everybody does.
I like that way of thinking about it, Amy, a lot. That it's like the Yetzer Hara that's gone unchecked. To me, that's really useful language. Like, when you stop checking the evil inclination and trying to turn it back toward good, even though it's always going to persist, then things go. And it seems like people have stopped in this text checking their evil inclinations and just run amok. I like that a lot. It's a much more helpful way to me too to think about it than just like people are bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I like that a lot too.
I like that. It's interesting because later on in this text, I don't think we're actually going to read it, but God says every thought of their hearts is evil, and therefore I will never destroy them again. And so it's like by the end of this text, God has sort of come out where you're talking to say like, oh, okay, this is part of human nature to have this sort of inclination, but getting rid of it's not the solution. Like figuring out ways to.
We're gonna have to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah, I really love that. The very last, almost the last verse that we read here, the earth had become corrupt and was filled with violence. To me, that addition of violence is really helpful there. It's not just like people are drinking and smoking and whatever like the list of sins are, but like the key is that there is violence being enacted.
Yeah.
At the end that's all creatures behaved corruptly.
That's what I was just going to ask you about. So at the beginning, again, like this is two different versions of the story, intermingled. At the beginning, it says it was the humans that are the problem. But then God says, I'm just going to blot out everything.
Yeah.
The people and the animals and the creeping things and the birds. I regret this whole situation. But it only identifies the humans as evil. But then by the time we get to that second one towards the end, it's not just the humans that are evil. It is, I'm looking for the actual words here.
In the CEB in verse 12, it's because all creatures behaved corruptly on the earth.
Yeah. Yeah, this is all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth.
Yeah.
So I guess, I guess that maybe that includes animals?
I think there's actually some ambiguity in that text, the way that it's actually written in Hebrew. The word there is basar, which means all flesh, which I think one could reasonably take as a reference to all creatures, the way the CEB does. But I think you could also reasonably say it's referring to humans. And, to me, that either way you go is kind of interesting, because if you say it's only humans and yet all the animals also get destroyed, that opens up this whole world of like the things that humans do have impact that reaches far beyond human beings. So we bring the whole of creation down with us, even though it's like all the other creatures are innocent. They get caught up in this thing. But I also think about, like in Isaiah and other places where there's these images of like the lion lying down with the lamb and, kids playing over the hole of the adder and things like that, that there really is a biblical vision in which animals aren't predators. And that's the way they were created to be, I think, in Genesis 1 even. They're given the plants to eat. And so, so I think there is a way of thinking about even the even the natural predation of animals is viewed as violence in this text.
Yeah.
And so that is seen like that's not the way the world is supposed to be. So humans are violent in our sort of animal nature. Animals are violent in their animal nature. And so God's got to start over.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know which one of those ways of reading it. I mean, I guess you don't really have to settle. But like, are you thinking like the field mice and the emus and whatever are like terrible? Or are you thinking like, what are you thinking?
It's really interesting to think about whether there is something inherent in the nature of animals that is problematic to the text, that really would that almost makes me change the way that I think about, like, reading this just about the humans. It's sort of like humans messed up.
Yeah.
Like the humans this is a judgment on the humans. Once you add the animals into the equation, for me, it's much more God created a system for all of us with our natures that is not actually what God had in mind.
Yeah.
Like for me, it sort of takes the moral judgment piece out of it, and is just like there was a problem in the conception of this thing, which, I mean, I'm sure that's like deeply heretical in all traditions. But that's where my mind goes when you add animals to the equation. Yeah. If the animals are not in the equation, it's actually an interesting question to me. Like, why couldn't God just wipe out the humans? Like, can creation not exist in God's mind?
Yeah.
Without humans? Like, are we so integral to this thing that...
Yeah. Let's hang on to that question. I think that's an interesting one because, a flood is not a very precise, it's not a surgical tool.
No, no. You'd have to use a different system.
Yeah, but maybe there could have been other ways. The other thing to keep in mind about that, where you were, is in the narrative flow, we're post-Eden. And so we're actually not in the world, at least in the J version of the story, we're not in the world that God originally intended. Because of human disobedience, we're now in some other kind of world where there's animosity. And so then you can sort of, human disobedience still ends up in the equation there. So that's kind of probably where I tend to go, is that human disobedience has created division in the world, and that animals in one way or another kind of get caught up in that. I don't know though. Let's sort of hang on to that. Now, God's plan is, I'm just going to wipe out everything. But the language in verse 6 is just so striking to me, especially the way that the CEB translated it. This is not God is like, ha ha, you are terrible, I'm going to strike you down. The CEB, the Lord regretted making human beings on the earth, and he was heartbroken. I just like that image of a heartbroken God. This is not God who's like just waiting to like destroy something. Can you talk about that image and how you sit with it?
This is a weird answer to the question, I think, but it's what is at the front of my mind, so I'll just say it. Have you heard of a thinker named Adrienne Marie Brown?
I don't know her.
She's common with the younger folk than us, the younger generations. And she describes herself as like a sort of a spiritual activist who is involved in like justice activism in the world, and also on sort of spiritual care for people who are involved in that work, which is really spiritually draining. And one of the things, she was interviewed recently she's come up in my life in a lot of ways in the past few months, but one of them was that she was interviewed on Being. And one of the first things she talked about was the strength that it takes to recognize when something that you have created, like, for example, a nonprofit or something, shouldn't exist anymore in the form that it's in. Either because it met its mission, it did what it was supposed to do, and it should break down and let the resources be sort of reformed towards something else, or because it's not doing what it was meant to do. But there's this feeling sometimes in the community that she's a part of, and that I'm a part of, that once you start something and it's like, this is your baby, this is your idea, you have to make it work. You have to hold on to it like in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, I've been thinking a lot lately about sort of the life cycle of ideas and the life cycle of movements and of, organizations, and the work and the courage that it takes to be able to say, like, I think we need to dissolve this and sort of let the mushrooms break it all down and then see what springs up from it. And that's like, it's impacting my whole reading of this whole story.
Yeah.
But I think, and this is not a very theological statement, but it's a very human statement. Like, I see God sort of in that place that, like, God created this thing wholeheartedly, and it really, like, this should have worked. This should have worked. But to be able to recognize it didn't, and I'm going to do something about it and be able to grieve that and act on it. I mean, I don't really like that meant destroying, all of life. That's a problem. But in a more abstracted example, I actually think that's an important thing for me to remember is an option.
Yeah. One of the things that I really appreciate about the way you read the Bible is you're often talking about how God is, like, figuring out how to be a God in relationship to human beings. Like, oh, is that what human beings are like? Is that what human beings need? Like, I really, like, that helps me make sense. I mean, I'm kind of similar, but that helps me make sense of texts like this. And what you're saying there, like, God created with this, like, beautiful intention and, like, imagine how wonderful it was going to be. And then the reality of it is like, oh my goodness, like, it is the nature of human beings that they're not ever going to be quite what I had imagined. And so now what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I like that, the courage to kind of start over. I've never thought about this text that way as, an act.
Well, because it's a terrifying and violent text. Like, it's this is not a children's story.
No, but it is, which is so weird.
Just because there are animals, I mean, you really can't actually read the story and say this is. I mean, you got to really skip over some important plot points.
My daughter, who is 4, is just gotten her first children's Bible, and she's really into it. And so we've read it cover to cover a couple of times already. And that story, she loves that story. And I'm like, this is a really terrible story. Like,
well, they don't like in the pictures. There's not like people drowning in the flood.
That's
like,
true. It's true.
It's sort
my
of own terrifying
there,
children's
but you kind of have to
book.
know what's going on. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. So it's such a cognitive disconnect for me.
Bobby, how do you think about God being heartbroken?
Heartbroken. Like, I don't know how to make sense of it, and I really love where you went with it, but just that image, like, this is a God who really, really wants to be in relationship and who really, really wants it to work out. This is not the kind of, like, knee-jerk, hair-trigger, vengeful God.
Mm-hmm.
Even though what God is about to do is really, really awful, at least from the human perspective. And, like, I don't quite know how to hold those two things together, but it gives me some comfort to think, like there's a God who grieves. There's a God who grieved then when humans do violence to each other. There's a God who grieves now when humans do violence to each other. There's a God who recognizes that things are not the way, like, when God set out to do it, this is not what God had hoped was going to happen. And, like, I really love that idea, and God is kind of working it out along the way. Like, that, I don't know. Some people like a God who is, like, large and in charge all the time. And I kind of appreciate the idea that God is feeling things and is regretting things and is not sure, like, what should I do next? And trying the best God can to make a world with us. I don't know, it's a different kind of sense of, like, sovereignty or fidelity or something than is often the case, but it's a God that's much more relatable to me. Now, God has decided to destroy everything, but then there's Noah. And you read this text for us at the end of last season, which I appreciated so much. The Torah practice of starting where the next cycle is going to pick up. And you went all the way through verse 8, as for Noah, the Lord approved of him, because you said we've got to end on something that's hopeful in the Jewish in the Jewish
Yeah.
way. So even in the midst of all this disappointment, there's Noah and his descendants. The language there, in the CEB, he was moral and exemplary, and he walked with God. When you imagine Noah, like, why does God look favorably on Noah? Do you have any thoughts about, like, what is it about Noah?
I guess, I mean, I picture Noah as really being sort of set apart from the rest of his society. And I don't know if that's just because I don't know why exactly that is. Maybe I'm picturing him sort of alone in the ark, but I mean, the other thing is that what he's asked to do, I'm about to destroy the whole world, so make yourself an ark.
Yeah.
And and we don't know how he felt about this, but I know one of the questions the rabbis have about him is, why didn't he go warn people? Like, if he was so righteous, why wasn't he concerned for the fate of other people? And I guess one answer in my mind is that he really was pretty, as you were saying, if humans are on their own are often good, and humans in society often have troubles, I picture Noah as being kind of a loner.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you get a sense of Noah as kind of a loner, or at least, like, it seems like he's the only righteous person. And I guess there's his 3 sons, which it's less clear whether they are also righteous or whether his righteousness sort of covers them.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts about that? Is there a Jewish teaching about, are they also righteous, or is it because he's righteous? Do you know?
In my mind, it's because he's righteous.
Yeah.
And so maybe that makes it more likely that they're righteous. But yeah, no, in my mind, this is all on Noah.
The language that's here about Noah walked with God, that's the hithpael, hithalech, and it's the same verb that's used of the way God and Adam walked together in the Garden of Eden. And so to me, those seem connected, that there's like an intimacy of relationship, like Noah's kind of living his life, like following God around, like doing the thing. And so I don't know specifically what that means, but it seems to me like the patterns of his life are very much take their lead from what God is up to. It's like God is Noah's companion.
It's reminding me a little bit of the teaching from Micah, to walk humbly with your God.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. Yeah.
He's doing that.
Which can mean, like, it's just sort of like the way you live your life is like consciously in relationship all the time, instead of like, here's the specific things that one must do.
Right. It's not like a checklist of things.
Yeah.
It's more, yeah.
Hi, everyone. It's Bobby here from BibleWorm. We hope you're enjoying the podcast. Amy and I started BibleWorm a couple of years ago because we wanted to create a space where we could talk deeply about the Bible in ways that bring together our academic backgrounds in biblical studies and our deep engagement with communities and people of faith. We decided to make this resource free because we want everyone to have access to sound biblical scholarship that connects biblical faith to everyday life. We hope you're finding the podcast fits that need. That said, while the podcast is free, making it is not. Amy and I and the rest of Team BibleWorm spend a lot of time and energy studying, recording, and editing the podcast to make it freely available to the public. If you enjoyed the podcast, and if you find yourself in a position to support our work, we hope that you will consider becoming a BibleWorm supporter for as little as $4 per month. For a bit more, you can also get early access to episodes, weekly liturgies, video Bible studies, join a monthly discussion group, and more. We realize not everyone is in a position to support the podcast, but if you appreciate our work and want to support us, we hope you'll check out our Patreon at patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for more details. Thanks so much for listening, and now back to this week's podcast. Okay, so God is going to destroy everything except God has now picked out Noah and his family. So I'll pick up then in verse 13. So up until now, Noah doesn't know what's happening. So in verse 13, God said to Noah, "The end has come for all creatures since they have filled the earth with violence. I am now about to destroy them along with the earth, so make a wooden ark. Make the ark with nesting places and cover it inside and out with tar. This is how you should make it. 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet high. Make a roof for the ark and complete it 1 foot from the top. Put a door in its side. In the hold below, make the second and third decks. I am now bringing the flood waters over the earth to destroy everything under the sky that breathes. Everything on earth is about to take its last breath. But I will set up my covenant with you. You will go into the ark together with your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives. From all living things, from all creatures, you are to bring a pair, male and female, into the ark with you to keep them alive. From each kind of bird, from each kind of livestock, and from each kind of everything that crawls on the earth. A pair from each will go in with you to stay alive. Take some from every kind of food and stow it as food for you and for the animals. Noah did everything exactly as God commanded him. So this is kind of interesting to me, even from the beginning when God has said the whole thing is messed up and we've got to destroy it. Like God is immediately also working to save everything. You have thoughts about that kind of like I'm going to destroy everything that breathes, but let's make sure there's enough of you to restart. You have any? I mean, I don't even know what my question is, but those two things happening simultaneously is very interesting to me.
It is really interesting, and it's related, I think, to my like smaller level observation that like it's just so I just find it so funny that he gives such specific instructions about the boat
Yeah.
that he's supposed to make. Like those are really specific.
Very
not
specific.
that it's everything, but like I just
Noah wasn't really paying attention, right? Like God shows up and is like, gonna destroy the world. Okay, like 1.5 feet from here, and you're like,
I know,
there's no way you're paying attention.
It almost is like when you're these moments in life where you're like you're holding some real grief about something, and also it also in that sort of planning mode.
Yeah.
And so I mean in a sense the plan is destroy everything. But I almost see like God's interest in all of these details about like, my translation has like what kind of wood it's supposed to be and what like, I mean, it's really, but there's just this like hopefulness about it. Like, yes, everything is terrible and we're going to end the whole thing, but I'm going to focus more, like give more words to the plan for survival than I am to the fact that I'm wiping everything out, which emotionally I'm like, what? Like, give Noah a minute here. Like, what is he thinking about this? Like, what is going through his mind? What is on his heart when God says, okay, so I'm going to destroy the whole earth, except you. Your family is going to be the only family in existence.
Yeah.
There's no time to sit with that because it's like God's energy quickly heaps up on the plan for what could be next. There's a
you really do have a sense that there's a hopefulness and there's an urgency about it. Like you better get to work, Noah, because like this thing is coming. So I said really this kind of balance between God's judgment, God's wrath, and God's mercy is such a hard thing for me. And this text amplifies that it's just so clearly a problem here. One of the thinkers that's helped me, I don't know that it helps, but James Cone, who is a famous Black liberation theologian who died just a couple years ago, and he talks about God's love and God's wrath being flip sides of the same coin. Mm-hmm. And for those who are oppressed, God's love looks like wrath toward the oppressor. And like it has taken me a long time to get my head around that, but he's right about that, I think. And so one way of processing what's happening in this story is the violence cannot be allowed to stand. And so that God has to do, like maybe God could have used a finer tuned instrument, but the violence cannot be allowed to stand. And so this sort of desire to also show a way forward, even while putting an end to the violence, that, that's kind of the closest I can come to making sense out of this text. The fact that God uses violence to put an end to violence feels like a poor choice to me. And like later on, God's going to try some other kinds of things in order to put an end to human violence. In the Christian story, like, it is exactly human violence against Jesus that puts an end to human, like, not an end to human violence, but to the significance of human violence. Like, the story it goes on in both traditions from here. But that impulse of, like, we got to stop this, but I also want to make a future possible seems like the right impulse, even if the means are a little difficult.
Yeah, I'm interested. I'm still chewing on, you used the phrase, I think, mercy and justice. Was that it? And I think I am not reading this story. As I hear you say that, I realize I'm not reading this story as any of that. Like, I almost feel like this is like God is looking at God's project. Like, this is not about about any personal connection to anybody. Maybe I would see that coming more once we sort of get into these more covenanted relationships later. But this is like, this project didn't work, so we're ending it and we're starting a new project. And then it's not that he loves Noah, it's that Noah's the best person for that job. And it's not that he has any feel. It's just not about the people to me. Like,
that's interesting.
It's this whole endeavor was a bust. And then that's sort of what changes, after this story, maybe it's not just after the story, but you see more of this, like, personal relationship between God and humans, or God makes some commitment to that more personal involvement.
Because you're exactly right. You get covenant language, I think, for the first time in the biblical text right here. I'd have to check that. But in verse 18, I will set up my covenant with you, like future tense.
Yeah.
So the covenant is going to be the new thing at the end of this text. But currently there is no relationship, like a committed relationship. That's an interesting way to think about it. Like, to me, the, like, violence is the problem and an end needs to be put to violence seems like judgment or justice. Maybe justice is not exactly right. Maybe judgment is really what I mean. And saving somebody in the process, like, God's not able to or willing to put a complete end to it, seems like mercy. But I think you're right. Like, I probably have overemphasized or something. Like, I do think it's there. But I see what you're saying.
No, I'm not saying it's not there at all. It just, it never occurred to me until I heard you say that I think I read this story in a pretty depersonalized.
Yeah, I kind of like that. Like, I kind of like the depersonalized way. And then what's changing is God is moving closer toward personal relationships.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really interesting. We could spend a lot of time talking about this, but what's interesting is the saving of the people. I guess the saving of the animals we probably should talk about too. I don't know really what to say about that besides God saves the animals. Must have been a crowded boat.
I have a bar mitzvah student I just read this with the other day, and the kinds of questions he has about this are just things that, first of all, the fish would have been just fine.
Yeah.
The fish could have just lived in the floodwaters.
Yeah.
And then he had a lot of questions about what kind of food you bring onto the boat for carnivorous animals, and whether you should bring animals that are alive because otherwise the meat would rot, or if they had some system for preserving it. I don't think we need to get into all that.
Yeah.
Dive into the mind of a 12-year-old.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, I guess in the P version of the story anyway, everybody's a vegetarian at this point. Although then I don't know what the violence of animals is, but because it's not until the end of this story that God gives permission to eat meat.
Even for the animals? The animals are vegetarians?
Yeah, in Genesis 1.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. I'll tell him that next time. He'll be glad.
I think so. Go back and check me. But the plants, the seed-bearing plants are given as food for the animals.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's my answer. Everybody's a vegetarian. Okay, so we're moving on to chapter 8, beginning in verse 6. We're sort of skipping over the details of how the flood got started and everything. So we're picking up on after the flood has already started. So chapter 8, verse 6. After 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that he had made. He sent out a raven, and it flew back and forth until the waters over the entire earth had dried up. Then he sent out a dove to see if the waters on all of the fertile land had subsided, but the dove found no place to set its foot. It returned to him in the ark, since waters still covered the entire earth. Noah stretched out his hand, took it, and brought it back into the ark. He waited 7 more days and sent the dove out from the ark again. The dove came back to him in the evening, grasping a torn olive leaf in its beak. Then Noah knew that the waters were subsiding from the earth. He waited 7 more days and sent out the dove, but it didn't come back to him again. In Noah's 601st year, on the first day of the first month, the waters dried up from the earth. Noah removed the ark's hatch and saw that the surface of the fertile land had dried up. This text lingers for a really long time on these birds flying back and forth. Like that's what happened in that little section of text.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about why does this text linger so long on the flying of the birds?
I love that question, especially for a text that there's so much it doesn't tell us. So to get these little like moments that are all of a sudden under a magnifying glass, like this, this question of like, how do you know when it's over?
Yeah.
Which again is like a really deeply human question when you feel like you're in this period of destruction, or you have been told the world is not only dangerous but uninhabitable right now, and you need to hole up. Gosh, now I'm making it sound like COVID, which I didn't mean to make it sound like, but like how do you know? How do you know when it's over? And I don't know. I love this, that first the bird. Well, first of all, again, there are 2 different versions of the story. Yeah. Just, one of them is a raven, and it gets this done in 1 verse.
Yeah.
And then we get the dove.
Yeah.
And it's just such a, I don't know if I have a lot of metaphorical meaning to put on it. I just love that, like, the first time he sends it out, no, it's not ready. It's not that he suddenly knew that the world was ready. And the second time he saw progress, but it still wasn't ready. And only the third time did he know. And he knew because the bird didn't come back.
Yeah.
Which is a kind of an ambiguous way to find something out, like if you're looking, you can sort of surmise from that like, I guess the bird found somewhere else to land, but maybe the bird got dizzy and flew into the water.
Yeah. No, I mean, I love the way you're thinking about that, Amy, because if you just imagine what it's like to be on that boat in the middle of, like, if you imagine a cosmic flood and the trauma of that, they've got the doors, the windows closed, like everything is closed up. And that question of how, I haven't thought of it that way, but how do you know when it's over? And the sign that it's over is very, very subtle. I really love the dove. Like, that little dove just feels like so brave to me. Like, it's flying out and it's looking like it's looking. And there's the gentle relationship, just in my reading anyway, between Noah and the dove. Like, in verse 11 in the Hebrew, it says the dove could not find a resting place for the soles of its feet. And they're just, I don't know what it is about that, but it just sounds like it's so like his little feet or her little feet had no place to rest. And so
I think it's verse 9.
Oh, verse 9. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that too. I love that, because otherwise I would just picture the bird like fly back in the window.
Yeah.
But it's, but he couldn't find a place to put his feet, little bird. So Noah stuck out his hand, so the bird had a place to put his feet.
That's so sweet. Like, there's such an intimacy, such a connection between these 2 creatures. And like, they're both like thinking about survival. And it's just such a beautiful thing. And then the olive leaf is the sign, like, it's a tiny little, there must have been somewhere out there an olive tree that was sticking up above the water enough that little dove could have landed there for a second and got on the leaf. And that's like the symbol. That's the way you know, like a tiny little sliver of evidence. And then I love the way you said that then the final evidence is a lack of evidence, right? The dove just never comes back.
Yeah.
And you have to trust. I love that. You have to trust that the dove found a place to land instead of that the dove finally gave out and died in the waters or whatever. Like,
yeah, after such a like profoundly terrifying destruction, the signs that it's safe again are so subtle.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You feel so much relief at the end. Oh, the earth has dried up and now there's fertile ground again. But can you just imagine, like, you get off the boat and everything that used to be there is gone? Like, you are the only, 8 people and some animals? I just like the hopelessness or I don't even know. Like, it feels like such a moment of possibility in the text. But then when you think about what that would actually be like.
Right. If you really try this text, like so many biblical texts, doesn't give us anything about the interior of Noah or anyone in his family. All we have is the children's stories where they're quite happy to do this. And, this is all great. It's sort of like, an old McDonald's kind of version of the story. But I'm actually surprised there's not like maybe there is some kind of like young adult novel or movie or something that really looks at this as a sort of like dystopian, what would this really feel like?
Yeah.
Like maybe you'd feel a little bit of sort of pride or self-righteousness or faith, or maybe a lot of that, but also I would imagine a lot of fear and grief and unsureness.
Yeah. Okay, so the final section of this text picks up in chapter 9, verse 8. God said to Noah and to his sons with him, I am now setting up my covenant with you, with your descendants, and with every living being with you, with the birds, with the large animals, and with all the animals of the earth, leaving the ark with you. I will set up my covenant with you so that never again will all life be cut off by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, This is the symbol of the covenant that I am drawing up between me and you and every living thing with you on behalf of every future generation. I have placed my bow in the clouds. It will be the symbol of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember the covenant between me and you and every living being among all creatures. Flood waters will never again destroy all creatures. The bow will be in the clouds, and upon seeing it, I will remember the enduring covenant between God and every living being of all the earth's creatures. God said to Noah, This is the symbol of the covenant that I have set up between me and all creatures on the earth. So you were talking a little while ago about the relationality that you did not see early in the text. And then now here we have kind of explicit language of covenant between God and the language is all creatures. So I'm just curious where you start thinking about like the significance of this covenant that's being made right here.
It's so interesting because as often happens to me in these conversations, it's not really a question I had thought about before we started talking about it. So I feel like it's a little bit of a half-baked thought in my head. And I actually have often wondered, at this moment, would God make an eternal covenant? Like, has God not just seen what could happen? Like, what has changed? I know, fine, these are descendants of Noah, but like, descendants are descendants,
Yeah.
Like, why does God think that it's going to be better? And I think a different answer to that question is somehow over the course of this experience, maybe God thought that God could approach this all as this sort of like, we are a mission-driven organization and we are only, abiding to our mission. And if the mission, like not human-based, but like we're trying to accomplish something here and be willing to blow it all up. And somehow over the course of this time, God has decided to create something different.
Yeah. Like
that it's not just, this is how I want the earth to look. It is still that, but there's also a covenant. Like there's also this more, I would say interpersonal, but God's not really a person, but relational,
yeah,
aspect to it.
I really love that, Amy. And it's not in the text that we're reading, but in chapter 8, verse 21, God says, I will not curse the fertile land anymore because of human beings, since the ideas of the human mind are evil from their youth.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of this text, God said, I'm going to destroy the world because human beings are evil from their youth. And at the end, God says, I'm never going to destroy the world again, or at least with a flood, because human beings are evil from their youth. So
Yeah.
Human beings haven't changed from the beginning to the end of this
Right.
text. But God's orientation to human beings absolutely has changed. I think you're on exactly the right path, that God has chosen here to take a different approach. And it is a covenanted approach, a relational approach, which has a commitment that, okay, I realize it's never going to be the way that I imagine it could be, and yet I'm going to be committed to it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That's really, really, really profound to me. Do you make anything of the all creatures aspect of this text? It's not just even with the human beings here, it's with every creature that was on the ark. Like the scope of this covenant is enormous.
Well, I need to check the Hebrew. I don't know if you have it more handy than I do. In verse 11, it says, I will maintain my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. So do you think that means the covenant is with all flesh?
So verse 15 is where I'm kind of working from.
Okay, you're looking at 15.
I will remember the covenant between me and you and every living being among all the creatures.
Yep, that's pretty clear there.
But I like what you're saying. Like, the sense that you get is the covenant sort of has Noah at its core, but it's broader than that. Mm-hmm. So I think your sort of instinct, like, but it's with Noah, is probably right. But then it's sort of then it includes all creatures in it as well. So
I mean, it's sort of in the same way that you were pointing out earlier, that when humans bring violence to the earth, like the impact is on everything.
Yeah. So this is the reverse. Now there is human who brings some kind of change in God's heart that now has implications for all of creation. I really like that. I also like I love the universality of this covenant. Like, God's going to get more specific later about God's covenants, but here it's not any particular people group. It's not even just people. It is all creatures. And so we are all tied up in this covenant with God together, whoever we are and whatever species we are. Like, it is big, 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 this relational aspect of God. And sometimes we like to divide ourselves up into little camps and, all of the things. But to say this, like, God has come toward humankind and toward all creation the same, like on equal footing at this sort of broadest level. To me, that's really important and really profound. It has ecological implications where sometimes, I think especially Christians will say, well, God kind of gave us the earth to like have dominion and subdue, and so we can do whatever we want. And then here it's not that. It is God has made a covenant with all life. And so we need to be respectful of the covenant as well.
Yeah. Yeah, there are maybe moments or ways in which like we'll have different relationships to things within creation. And then there is this sort of foundational starting place where if God has the same relationship to each thing in creation, we can derive from that whatever differences we have in our, in the way that we relate to different parts of creation, it's not because we are fundamentally different or superior or closer to God or.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. The other thing I want to ask you about is this language, like this whole thing about the rainbow and the reminder.
Wouldn't it be funny if this whole thing were just like written as like a just so story? Like, why is there a rainbow in the sky? And someone wrote a very elaborate story.
It's just all an etiology of the rainbow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is that at some level, but like, and the thing that always gets me here is God does not say the rainbow will be in the sky to remind you that I will be faithful to you. It's that the rainbow is in the sky to remind me that I promise never to destroy you again. It's just that, like, that's so interesting. I don't know. How do you think about that, sort of the idea that there is a reminder when I see that I will remember?
I mean, it's almost like in a similar way to how you pointed out later in this chapter, God says, like, God recognizes human nature and makes a conscious decision that even given all the problems with human nature, God will not destroy the world with a flood, which is actually a little bit of a narrow promise, but that, okay, we'll take it. We'll take it. Yeah. It's almost like God anticipates that there will be moments
Yeah.
Like they're like that, like the parenting, conversation that we talked about before. Like you can decide that you are not going to engage in certain kinds of ways that you find are not helpful or are violent towards your relationship or whatever. But there will be moments.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to work towards that. Like God is committing to something that maybe is not going to be easy.
Yeah. Brueggemann I talk about Brueggemann so much, I got to find somebody else to talk about. But
he's a smart guy.
He is, and he asks really interesting questions, and he was very formative for me. But I've been reading some of his work, and he talks about, I think he might be actually drawing on David Blumenthal, who was our teacher at Emory, But he talks about God being in recovery from violence, which I think is really interesting language. And I'm not entirely sure that I want to go all the way with him there. But what he is saying is exactly along your lines of there are going to be times, and there are times. And we talked about that text last year, Numbers 14, where God wants to destroy everybody. And Moses taught God back down and saying like, no, remember, you're also a compassionate God. And to me, this rainbow kind of functions that way. Like there's, even if there's not a Moses to talk me back down, here's a rainbow that's going to remind me of the commitment that I made. Like I'm still going to have the impulse to want to destroy.
Right.
Sometimes, because but here's the rainbow that's going to like keep me in check. All right, Amy. Well, this text has many, many things that one could talk about. And we've talked about some of them. I'm curious, as you're sort of thinking about how this text connects with contemporary life and with our communities, what's rising to the top for you?
I think that what's rising to the top of my mind today is this question of when something... I can't get away from this Adrienne Marie Brown sort of question that I raised earlier. And I really like the added element at the end of God moving from a sort of the earth is supposed to look a particular way to I am committed to certain behaviors in relationship to the inhabitants of the earth.
Yeah.
And I think those are two really different ways to go about different endeavors we might go about in our life.
Yeah.
So for example, raising children, like for me, given I'm sure there are boundaries in this too. But I'm committed to the children that I have, and they do all kinds of stuff, and I'm in it with them because I'm committed to them personally. Whereas there are other undertakings that I do that if it is if things were happening like some of the things my children try to do, I would just be like, this is not working. And we need to call it. But to have the sort of insight to know which one are you doing? Like, is it that you're clearly working towards a mission, and when the mission's not working, you need to call it and end this project and let it reform in a different way? Or is it that you are committed to the people, and however that needs to shift what your vision is, then it needs to shift what your vision is? And I'm just finding that a really interesting way to look at all kinds of different things in my life, from things where you could say there's any kind of mission to any way that I spend my time. Like, am I doing this because of an ideal, or am I doing this because of the people who are involved in it? And I think that actually has a lot of fruit for me to help me make decisions about what should be in my life and what should not be in my life. We're reading this text as we're in this Jewish month of Elul, which leads up to the High Holy Days, which is this time of reflection in the Jewish community about where our lives are sort of on track and where maybe they veered off a little bit. And part of that, always is thinking about what kind of boundaries you need to have, not just to keep things out of your life, but to keep things in your life, to really assess, like, what do I have in my life and in my spirit and in my work what should be there and what shouldn't be there, and how do I need to pivot. And I'm surprised to hear myself saying this because this really is such a disturbing and violent story in so many ways. But if you can get past that, I don't know, it's actually, it can be, it's a little freeing at this moment for me to see God just look at this and say, like, I need to kind of start this over. This is not working. And if I just keep trying to do little fixes and massage things, like it's not what I meant to do. And I need to turn it all the way back. I've never thought anything like even so vaguely positive about this story. So I'm surprised to hear that coming out of my mouth, but that's how it's hitting me right at this moment.
That's so interesting, Amy. I'm gonna have to think about that one. I think there's a lot of richness there, and then I'm trying to decide if what I'm about to say agrees with that or is like exactly the opposite of that.
Great.
I'm not quite sure, but the thing that's sticking with me about this text is that line that's in chapter 6, right at the very beginning, that said, "The Lord regretted making human beings on earth, and he was heartbroken." And I've just been thinking about that grief, the grief of God and the regret at having created human beings who turn out to be pretty violent. And that God's like move then is destruction. And I mean, that is so true. I don't know what it says about God exactly, but it's so true of human experience, I think, that our violence is often born out of our grief. Like we have lost something that we don't know how to get back any other way. Something has disappointed us. Something has turned out some way that we don't know how to handle. And so our solution, people are not what we want them to be. And so our solution is violence. And like that instinct for God, like I regret this so much, like I'm heartbroken about it. So I'm going to destroy something. And I see that in myself. And so I think there's something about, like this historical moment that we're in, like I kind of want to burn something down like about every other day, maybe every day. Like I get that. And the move that God makes at the end, I mean, maybe it's pretty late in the game by now, but God does finally make a move to say, people are wicked. People are the same as they were at the beginning of this text. But whereas I chose to be violent about that previously, now I'm going to choose to commit myself to relationship, even though people are still pretty terrible. And I think, well, maybe that move that God makes from grief leads to violence, to grief leads to deeper commitment. Maybe there's something to that for me too, to say, I can choose to respond to my grief differently than simply being violent about it. And I can choose. I mean, I don't know, like there are unhealthy commitments that one can make out of one's grief. Like I don't want to minimize that.
Yeah.
But there are other options that we have that are not violent, that are recommitment, and they are about relationship. I love that distinction that you're making in this text between like a pre-covenant God and a covenant God, and the different responses that God has in those sort of different stages, or I don't know exactly how you think about it, but before the commitment, violence is easier. Then once there is a commitment, then violence becomes harder. And even though you know that urge is still going to arise in you from time to time, there's the rainbow that reminds God, and we can have our own reminders like, oh, nope, I choose to be different than that. I think there's a hope, even in the middle of this really, really awful story, that paints God in a light that I do not like to think about God. The movement of God from the beginning to the end doesn't excuse what happens in the middle, but it reframes what happens in the middle a little bit. Like I think God ends up regretting. I think the text actually uses that language. God regrets what God chose to do there and decides to do something different. And so I think, okay, well, if God is like that, then maybe we can be like that too.
I love that, Bobby. And it's funny, you said at the beginning you weren't sure whether it agrees with what I said or totally doesn't agree with what I say. And I'm not totally sure either.
Yeah.
Other than that, I'm thinking of this as like creation is God's project that God has decided to stop. And you're thinking of it as like, yeah, well, your project was a bunch of living things. So
Yeah.
So yeah, that does put like sort of a different different bent on the whole situation.
That is true, yeah.
But I think that's really right on, that to think of this again sort of in terms of our emotional lives, and when we feel that we should have power over a situation and feel grief that our power is not really expressing itself the way we would like it to.
Yeah.
It does feel really normal to lash out, and to decide to respond in a different way is a big deal. So it's kind of a cool moment to see in the, if we could say that, the evolution of God, or the growth of God's relationship to humans, or however we want to talk about it. It's kind of a cool moment to witness.
Amy, this is quite a way of starting out the new season of the BibleWorm. I feel like we just jumped right into the thick of it here.
We sure did.
Yeah. Well, next week we're going to continue, I think, with this theme of God developing new ways of being in relationship to humankind. We're going to talk about God's covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 12, 1 to 9.
I look forward to it. That's a really good story.
It's a great story. All right. I'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time.
Bye. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of BibleWorm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWorm podcast for details.
BibleWorm is produced by Bobby Williamson and edited by Joel and Laura Becker. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby. We are grateful to our many supporters for helping us keep the podcast going. A special thank you to our executive producer, Fox Valley Presbyterian Church in Geneva, Illinois.
Join us next time when we'll be discussing Genesis 12, 1 to 9, in which God again enters into covenant, this time with the family of Abraham. Until then, keep on digging.